Machines are one of the more interesting new Valhalla archetypes. Even though they receive the same kind of no-brain, unga-bunga, big damage boss monsters as everything else in Decisive Battle, they're primarily a tempo deck that builds up pressure over time and tends to punish overextension by clapping back with a big board wipe. They also have a decent enough draw engine now thanks to 2-cost Arthur, and they have a wide variety of recovery options to help them pull back from bad situations. It helps out a lot since their overall protection game is pretty bad, so they trade off being able to stick to the field by having ways to respond to being removed from it. Machines also got a nice new boss monster in the form of Motoko, who is a 7-cost whose effect might as well just say get fucked kid, since she's safe from just about every form of removal out there, thanks to having barrier, an impressively high stat line, and uncancelability. I know the popular meta call for her is either in Perfect Loki or Brunhild, but I don't really like either of those decks since Brunhild is very easily punished, and Perfect Loki is a deck for sadists. Arthur offers a nice middle ground since Harvesting Season into Scrap and Build offers an unchaseable option to get Motoko out on turn 2, which Brunhild lacks since she'll have to target Motoko in grave before being able to put her in the field. Arthur also doesn't have to compromise his main or side deck to accommodate for Perfect Loki's army of bullcrap, so you can focus entirely on running a machine deck rather than a Loki deck that also happens to have a turn 2 game-ending combo in it. Arthur doesn't have to worry about all the grave removal punishment that Loki does should you horribly whiff Scrap, and if you haven't figured it out already from this script, I really don't like Loki's playstyle. The machine lineup is mostly lower cost things. Vivian, Clockwork Girl, and Guinevere make up the 1-drops. Arthur is the only 2-drop, Lance is the only 3-drop, and then a 1 of Camelot and 3 Motokos are the bosses. In total, you should have about 22 to 23 machines, which is a serviceable number for what the deck is trying to do. I don't really like Machina. There's way too much non-destruction removal in the game for Eternal to really be worth anything, especially since his form of Eternal relies on you having an already established board. I'd honestly say it's not even that good with High God Alice, except for the fact that her gaining all races gives you plenty of unique ways to play and utilize her. Barrier and replacement effects are currently the most important things in the game, and I don't see that changing without way more cost-efficient board wipes. Point being, Machina's not that great since he still dies to Seal of Lenneth, Waveblade, Raise and Revive, Athena's Love, Shade, and I'm sure there's 1 or 2 other options I'm completely forgetting about. You want to splash in Chronos to get Harvesting Season off as early as possible, and he also lets you get away with having Power of Immortality in your runes as well as having Perfect Loki and March of the Dead in the main board. March is a really solid option since it can lead into either grabbing one of the said Perfect Lokis or most of the machine lineup you're running. Even if you can only grab 1 Arthur back, that's still a draw engine that your opponent will now have to answer and lets you potentially dig out another Lancelot or any of the other things in the deck. Notably Schrodinger. Schrodinger is a 4-drop that's actually pretty damn strong in Game 1 if you aren't up against a deck with Athenia. He lets you recycle most of your deck after it's been milled to the grave, and most importantly, Motoko. The main downside is that he doesn't get to copy enter effects. He can't target things like Clockwork Girl, Arthur, or Machina because they all have 0/0 stat lines and would gain their counters as they enter the field. Since Schrodinger has already entered the field, he will copy their 0/0 stat lines and immediately die. I guess if you want to have a really big brain play with it, you could copy Guinevere, banish something to gain 2 counters, and then use Schrodinger's rest ability to then copy Arthur or Clockwork, but why do that when you could just pick something better instead? In all honesty, he's just there to be another form of the Major in Game 1, and against decks that can't cite Graveyard Hate. I actually ended up overlooking him until I accidentally mulled away most of my Motokos in multiple games. I wanted a decent way to recycle her since there's no high-cost revival options in New Frontiers at the moment, and you'd be surprised at how many people aren't ready to deal with this guy hitting the board the first time they see him. He works well with cards like Misty Woods, since even if you mull Schrodinger, you can play Misty Woods and then pay 2 and get him back on the end of your opponent's turn when they've hopefully used up all their resources. Not only do you get Schrodinger back, but then you can immediately use him on your turn as an attacker. Also, Kaguya is in here because Clockwork Girl helps you fix for green, and getting the cost reduction from runes isn't that difficult. And if somehow you haven't used Scrap and Build by turn 7, it's pretty easy to set up her restock effect, but I wouldn't recommend making that an overall goal. She's also a really good target for Misty Woods, since, just like Schrodinger, she's also a fairy tale. So, value, I guess. For runes, you run Harvesting Season and Scrap for the obvious Motoko combo, but Harvesting can also set up for Perfect Loki rather nicely if you need it to. Maintenance is pretty standard for most machine builds. It helps fuel things like Vivian by giving her a free rest, or put Lancelot at a free Resonator pop, assuming he already has 1 counter. Since Harvest and Scrap are both Divinity 3, I find it better to use 2 different Divinity 1 runes rather than run Divinity 2 and have to deal with, well, which rune do you flip? Power of Immortality lets you make use of shenanigans with Guinevere, Camelot, Lancelot, or even Perfect Loki, depending on how you want to make use of it, with the only downside being that you need to either hit your Darkness Stone or have a Chronos out. The other one cost is a bit up to player preference. I personally like Soul Resonance since you can recover whatever you need in a pinch, but something like Sandstorm isn't bad either if you're expecting to see lots of weenie cards like, oh, I don't know, Percival, Ruck Egg, Little Scout, maybe. I don't think it's as helpful, but I guess it's okay with Perfect Loki if you play her since it adds an extra 200 to whatever you're doing. In all honesty, I'd debate swapping this for Song of the Fairies once Deepwood comes back into rotation, even if 4 is a bit steep to pay for a cancel spell. It really depends on how the metagame shifts. If you find yourself up against a deck that'll curate your graveyard for you, then in games 2 and 3 you can take out the Schrodinger's, Misty Woods, and Marches for better control options. Some notable things are that against Perfect Loki you want to bring in Loki's Insight and Nitrogen Blade. For Isis you want to bring in Sacred Spirit to deal with Nyarlathotep and Nitrogen Blade. Against Adam you'll want Sacred Spirit and Charm to bounce High God Alice or remove her, and also Nitrogen Blade. And against Lich, you'll want Wave Blade since Athenia and Resonator Lich are just below the threshold for Spirit to remove them. And you also want Nitrogen Blade. Case in point, you always want to have 4 Rondite in your main after game 1, unless you're up against something like Melgus or a weird janky deck that doesn't really rely on automatics. While I'm willing to show off the list, I don't have any match videos to go with it. I'll even post the original beta version of this deck, even though it's so horribly unoptimized. It's missing Schrodinger, Misty Woods, and even the side deck is lacking Camelot despite having Guinevere in there. I plan to test the updated build over the following weeks, but it's already performed well against Melgus OTK, Perfect Loki, and Adam via locals and some closed testing matches. If anything, I want people to see that most decks start out badly, and it's by testing and getting feedback that you can start to improve them. There's a pretty good chance this deck will be getting a lot of support at the end of February, with Machina hopefully adding more machines, the reintroduction of Dark Depths and Deepwood, and the potential for cards like Space-Time Anomaly to come back thanks to Valentina's blue-black typing. But I guess only time will tell.